on material information. It's 10 o'clock. We're bang on cue. There are plenty of you already waiting for us to start. If you don't mind, we'll just take maybe 1 or 2 minutes more just to wait for a couple more people to join us. There was quite a lot of demand for this morning's session, so I'm keen that we get the majority of people in the room before we get up and running. So just one moment and we'll be starting the session. In the meantime, if you'd like to join us by saying hello in the chat or introducing yourself and telling us whether you're residential focused in terms of sales or lettings, for example, give us a flavour for who's in the room, that'd be great. Today is all about having a really strong interactive session between all of us, the panel and the audience. That's the way we'll get the most out of the session. So if you just bear with us for maybe 60 seconds more, I will then kick the session off. That's brilliant to see everyone introducing themselves. Thank you very much. These sessions are great when you're viewing because you can see us, but we can't see you. So it means that we can engage with you. It's much more fun running the session that way. Like I say, it's 10:02, so we will kick off the session. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to what is going to be a fun and lively session on material information. We're joined today by a couple of leading lights from the industry. We're joined by Hannah Parker, our very own Chief Product Officer here at Addland, and we're also joined, most importantly, by Guy Welfare, who's the Policy Lead from National Trading Standards. Today, we're going to share with you some of the implications of what is happening in the world of trading standards and the direct relevancy to both residential sales and lettings, the impact on your business going forward of the changes in guidance that are on the scene today. Before we do that, let me set a little bit of background to what's coming up on the session. Just 3 things this morning. We're really focused and you get the most out of your day. First off, we will be handing over to Guy. He'll give us a brilliant overview of material information, the policy, and what it means for you in your day-to-day life. Things are changing. They're changing quite differently from what they have been, and we want everyone to be as informed as possible leaving today's session. We'll then have a run through into the Addland solution, as we call it. It's putting policy into practice. How can we help make sure you are compliant from day one? How can we help you get products and properties rather to market faster than any of the other agents? How can you be fully prepared for those changes? We'll have a quick Q&A both after Guy's initial session, so we can dive into the policy section, and then we'll have a second live Q&A at the end of the session when we've had the run through, so we can look at both of those 2 angles together. So that's the mainstay of today, so you know what to expect. In addition to that, maybe just 2 quick points on Addland, because a number of you may not be as familiar with us as others on the call. We have a number of customers on the call. We have some new people joining us as well. I can see that through the chat. What do? We help agents grow and maintain market share. That's our core primary goal at Addland, whether that's winning more instructions, accelerating transactions, making sure you don't get a series of fall-throughs during that process in the chain, for example. Importantly today, we're going to laser on one really important aspect of our service, which is how we help you get properties to market faster. And that's all about the compliance angle. How do we make it easy for you to stay compliant? That's us in a nutshell in relevance to today. And just to say that you can also trust us really nicely and safely with a whole series of other agents already on board as customers, from regional to national chains as well, who put their faith in what we do to help them drive their business forward. Customers we've been working with for 3, 4, 5 years in some cases, who've grown with us and really helped both support our business and seen their business flourish as a result of using our platform, our property reports, and tools like the material information solution. So that's us in a nutshell. So let me just hand over to some introductions. First, Hannah, perhaps you'd just like to introduce yourself to the room.
Good morning, everybody. So my name's Hannah. I'm Chief Product Officer here at Addland. I've been in the sort of property and PropTech industry for many years. And in fact, I'm old enough to remember the home information facts back when I was an agent at the very beginning of my career. So I'm that old. But I've had a career mostly working within PropTechs around the world and portals and for the last 4 years have been here at Addland, bringing lots of great solutions to life for the industry. So look forward to your questions later.
Thanks, Hannah. Guy.
Yes, thank you. My name is Guy. I work in the policy team for National Trading Standards Estate and Lettings Agency team. I'm also lead officer for property and lettings, or co-lead officer, I should say, for Chartered Trading Standards Institute. I've only been with Trading Standards about 2 years now, but my history, I worked in lettings for 5 years in Brighton. So I was a lettings manager for an independent agency there. So did a lot of the roles moving up to that position. So know it very well.
Brilliant, thanks guys. So we're going to dive straight in now with the first part of our session this morning, which is all about understanding the guidance for material information. Guy.
Thank you very much. Right, so I'm just going to give you a material information update today. So I'm going to talk about some of the changes that are coming down the line and some of the things that have done previously. One of the important things I wanted to get out of this is sort of the general takeaways and the general understanding of the legislation, as opposed to the exact specifics of the guidance, because I think it's important that you really understand the point of the legislation and where it's coming from. So the general update is parts B and C of the guidance were released in 2023 on the 30th of November. This covered the additional fields, such as flood risk, erosion, and some of the utilities in the property as well. We'll go through that in slightly more detail shortly. Since then, we've worked with the portals to update the fields on their sites to allow the easy implementation of the legislation, so allow people to put their adverts out there and their CRM systems to feed into their sites so that this can easily be done. We've also worked with the industry where we can to aid implementation, doing a number of webinars, speaking to a number of people and giving advice where suitable. We're currently in the process of reviewing the guidance, for the reason being is that the legislation that the guidance is currently based on, which is the Consumer Protection from Unfair Trading Regulations, is soon to be absorbed into the DMCC Act, which is the Domestic Markets Consumer and Competition Act. In reality, that doesn't really change the guidance much. It will stay almost exactly as is in terms of the content, because the act that is in place currently will feed straight into this, where this takes over on the 6th of April, I believe. A few changes will be brought in through that act though, and the ownership of the act will be taken on by the Competitions and Markets Authority, who off the back of that are given some additional powers. So whereas currently, if you are to undertake enforcement through the CPRs, you have to go through a court to issue a fine. Now the CMA will be able to issue fines of up to 10% of the global turnover of a business without having to go to court to seek approval. So it's a huge new power that the CMA have coming in. So it's a really important one to watch out for and how that will be used as well, because it will be a much quicker route to enforcement. So one of the big questions I get asked on a regular basis is why the guidance and why now? Previously, the main bit of legislation that dictated what should be in property listings was the Property Misdescriptions Act. This was repealed in 2013. Off the back of that, there was a huge space where no one in the industry really knew where they stood, what they were supposed to be doing for consumer protection. So we did a study to consumers in 2021 to show that 50% of people are less likely to buy a property if information is missing. 87% of people agree portals should include all key information in their property listings. And where we were talking at a range of conferences on general legislation, agents just didn't know how to comply with the legislation. One of the things to note about the legislation is it's intentionally vague, which is both good and bad at the same time. Why us as well is one of the questions, because we are the lead enforcement authority for the Estate Agents Act and the Tenant Fees Act. We felt we were suitable to work with the industry as part of a steering group to provide this guidance, as it's also the supporting legislation around this that focuses on consumer protection in the property industry for buying, selling and renting. So the Consumer Protection from Unfair Trading Regulations are where this bit of guidance sort of stems from. And the main points we're looking at is material information, which I'm sure a lot of you have heard bandied around. But what that actually is information which the average consumer needs according to the context to take an informed transactional decision. And then a transactional decision, it's important to note it's not just whether you're going to buy or rent a property, but it's also whether you pick up the phone to book in a viewing. It's any stage of the chain, either before, during, or after a purchase. What that means in real time is if you see information, are you still going to view a property based off that? So if you see something that makes you change your mind and say, no, I don't want to see the property, and that would be the same for most people, then that is going likely to be material information. The difficult thing with material information and the legislation, which I started talking about, is that it is intentionally vague. The reason it is because it's a wide piece of legislation that covers consumer protection across every industry. So you are protected by the consumer protection from unfair trading regulations if you buy a phone, if you buy a chocolate bar, and if you buy a house. That is why there is vagueness in it. So it's there to cover anything you do or buy in a consumer to business transaction. If you don't comply with it, there are hefty fines that you can face. There's not just what the guidance has as well. It's also, you have to look at the bigger picture. Material information can pretty much be, or could be, anything. So the guidance is just the bare minimum of what we're looking into and what we as a steering group thought is material information in almost every existence. So beyond this, what you need to have to be able to do is look at this pragmatically and weigh up the information you're provided as a business. So important to note, it's not just the guidance which I'm going to run through, it's everything outside of that could be material information. So I'm going to go through the approaches you can take when you're given information that's not covered by the guidance later on in the talk. So part A was the first bit of material information that came out, and it came out 18 months to 2 years before the rest did. And that covered sort of the real basics, which most of the industry was already doing. What we're looking at in part A is unavoidable costs and tenure. So these are things that are always relevant on every property, every listing. And we're looking at the market price or the rental price in lettings. We're looking at the tenure type. We're looking at the deposits required, if there are, for the property, and the council tax and domestic rates. And we've sort of packaged this into unavoidable costs. These are all costs that whoever's buying the property or renting the property will have to pay. Beyond that as well, it does break it down into a bit more detail when looking at tenure, because if it's a freehold, it's fairly straightforward. But if you're looking at leasehold, there's also additional costs that come with that. So you need to consider those additional costs, such as service charges, ground rents, and so on. Part B is looking at the property characteristics. And again, this is going to be relevant on almost all properties. And we're looking at the type of property, the materials, construction, whether there's anything that could be of detriment to a consumer. We're looking at number and types of room within the property, and we're looking at the utilities. Again, if they're standard utilities that are mains, then that in and itself is not going to be material information because it's what people would expect. But if there is anything outside of that, then that certainly would come under that bracket because there's often extra costs if there's joint sewerage systems that you need to pay charges for. What's noting is we've included that because we feel that to leave it blank when it is mains could again be slightly misleading to a consumer, and they may be asking a question when you have that information. And then finally, parking. Next slide. Thank you. Part C. What's important to note with Part C and some of the questions we get asked around whether it's relevant for sales and lettings. In short, yes, it is relevant for both, but what you need to consider is that what would be material information for someone buying a property might not necessarily be material information for someone renting a property. So if a property was grade 2 listed buildings that limited what you could do to the external of the property, for someone who's buying it, that's likely to be material information because it would have a big impact if they're planning to do stuff with the property, and it might have certain things that they have to maintain on a regular basis. So that would probably fall under the material information bracket. But if someone's renting that property, then chances are it wouldn't, because again, the implication of it being grade 2 listed is probably not going to have much to do with a tenant on a day-to-day basis and their enjoyment or expenses in the building. Whereas if you look at something like access routes across your garden in a family home, that was probably going to be similar for both sales and lettings, because if you've got a family, you might not want people walking through your garden as a right of access. So it's important to consider when looking at this, if it's sales or if it's letting, where it sits within that, and whether it's important for a tenant and a purchaser, or just a tenant or just a purchaser. But also looking at things like other restrictions and rights, building safety issues. Again, building safety issues, the cost implications for maintenance might be something that a seller would consider. But if there's day-to-day works that are going to be going on for a long time in the property, that's something that a tenant might have to pay consideration to as well. And then also looking at flood risk, coastal erosion, planning permissions and proposals for development, accessibility and adaptations, coalfields or mining areas. And again, those last three is likely to affect whether it's a tenant or someone buying the property as to what's included. With the nature of things like planning permissions, there's always going to be a level of pragmatism that's going to need to be taken by someone who's dealing or putting a property on to consider whether that is material information or not. But it's really important when looking at this that you've thought about it and you've considered your approach. So again, due to the nature of the legislation being as vague as it is, not everything can be covered in the guidance. It would be an endless document that would get numerous complaints about because it's too long for people to look at. So there's a few just simple things you can do when you're given new information to decide if it is material information. And you need to come to a decision whether it is. An easy one to think about is, would you buy or view the property if you found out this new piece of information compared to before you knew that information? And if you think, yeah, I would still let it to a family member, then you would have to consider, would everyone else in the office feel the same? Would they still let it knowing this new piece of information? And if you come to a decision that the majority of people it wouldn't affect, then chances are it's not material information. What I would say is whatever you do and whatever decision you come to, you need to be able to show that you've considered it. You need to record your reasoning as to why. Most people, that will just be a paragraph on a CRM system. If you're not sure, it's probably safer to give the information than not. What I would say with material information as well is if you just have a verbal conversation with someone, it's a little bit difficult to maybe prove that you've had that conversation if there is any pushback. So I would say that if you are giving things that you consider material information and it isn't on the listings where it should be, then make sure you put everything in writing to people. And in situations where material information comes out further down the line and you don't have it at the point of listing, because sometimes this happens, there might be a fall through for someone because they found out information that no one knew about the property 2 months into listing. You need to make sure that you're updating the portals with the new information on, and you need to make sure people who are potentially interested in the property through doing a viewing or showing interest are also given that updated information as well. It's also something to say, a lot of agents give you negative pushback on it to say, oh, it's more work to do. But we've had a lot of agents come to us with really positive stories on this as well. A lot of people are having less wasted time viewings. When I was an agent, the last thing I'd want the team working under me to do was go and do 10 viewings with people that aren't suitable to rent the properties for various reasons, because it's wasting everyone's time. I would much rather the negotiators that I managed would do 2 or 3 viewings with very suitable people who we knew could take the property and we knew was right for them. It's also looking to create much less fall throughs down the line because the information is coming out much sooner. So before people get emotionally attached and very frustrated by finding out information, they can see the bigger picture at the outset and they can make that informed decision as to whether they want to proceed. Also, if there is material information that they're not sure about, it gives them chance to speak to their professionals they're working with. It gives them chance to speak to their conveyancers, their surveyors, to find out what the impact of that information really is. And also, with anything, you want to look like professional agents. So if you're providing this information to people on the property portals and you're giving out complete listings, it looks like you're being a lot more honest and upfront to consumers. So it will give the consumer a better and fairer journey. And overall, less fall throughs, less wasted viewings, it's going to save you money in the long run. Perfect. And again, just reiterating, there's been an enforcement in place so far, and most of the enforcement's been done by redress schemes and local authorities. The CMA are a big organisation taking charge of the new act. They have a lot of clout and a lot of investigators and new financial powers to deal with breaches of this legislation. coming down the line, the government are going to be pushing for digitalisation of data more and more. There's been recent releases by Matthew Pennycook to this effect. And upfront information will continue to be at the heart of the improved consumer journey. There's a big push from everyone in the sector to provide this, certainly from regulatory bodies and some of the bigger companies as well. So I think it's important you get on board now. And the sooner you do this, the easier it's going to be to transition to when the new act comes out. And you don't want to be one of the people the CMA could use to make an example of by issuing out big penalties. Cool. Any questions? I can see lots coming through in the chat.
Brilliant. Yep, there are a lot of questions coming through. What I'm sensing from the various questions that are coming through, but also from the way you've gone through the details, Guy, and thank you for doing that, is that actually one of the ways that we should probably approach this as an industry is very much positively. This is a positive step forward for the industry in terms of putting all the information out on the table, allowing individuals to make informed decisions about a purchase or a rental of a property, and also a positive effect from an agent's perspective, which is actually potentially limiting fall throughs, chain collapses, things that actually fundamentally cost those businesses a significant amount of money, which is what we see in the other work that we do as well. Across the life cycle of a potential property. So I think positivity is probably the play and the main take from what you said today. Let's use it to our advantage. Let's use it to make sure that actually we're the most informed agent on the block, that we are the ones that are progressing quicker and faster. And as I say, we're going to show you how the Addland solution can help do that. But first of all, I'm going to put the questions that have come through into hopefully a little bit of a sequence for you guys, because some of the questions that have come out are really, really important. I'm going to clarify, I should clarify a point first that Katie has made, which is the guidance for material information. Now it's being consumed into the DMAA Act. Does that make it legislation versus consumer versus the guidance from the CPA? What's the difference between the legislative and the guidance perspective? That's what people seem to be wanting to get a feel for.
Yeah, of course. So guidance is always guidance. It's our interpretation of how agents comply with the legislation. So because, although it doesn't specifically refer to the DMCC because it's not in place yet, the general themes stay the same throughout. So again, there can be consideration to guidance if an enforcement action is taken. I know the CMA are looking to release some of their own guidance on the DMCC Act that's coming into force. I don't think there will be specifics to property in there, but that remains to be seen. They could have further guidance to support ours. Again, not sure on that yet. They've done a lot of sort of early studies to find out what people want and what they think they should put out, but waiting on what exactly they're going to release in terms of guidance towards that.
Okay. Another question that's related to that, which has come in as well, which is, should we stop referring to the CPRs in our contracts and amend this to the DMCC, or should we cover both? That's a really, really strong question.
Yeah, of course, anything to do with contracts, I'd check with the solicitor, but as of the 6th of April, the CPRs is being absorbed into the DMCC. So my thought would have been you would need to change it to DMCC, but again, for anything to do with contracts, I would just consult your solicitor who wrote them in the first place to confirm what you need to do with that.
Sure. Okay, I think that's fairly clear in terms of the direction of travel that we're looking for.
It's worth looking with that as well. Often we see contracts that refer to outdated legislation as well across the board. So if you haven't had your contracts and terms of business looked at for a while, then it's worth just getting them checked through properly for everything when the DMCC does come in, because there's often things on people's websites as well that refers to out-of-date legislation when it comes to things like people's private information being stored and things like that. It refers to outdated acts. So it's important to be on top of that sort of legislation.
Brilliant. A couple more specific questions now, just to drill down. How much interpretation is required? You know, are agents expected to understand things such as the complex covenants, or they just need to detail the fact there is a covenant on that property that someone needs to go and explore further? That has come up a lot in the last few weeks in conversations I've been having with agents.
Yeah, and it's a question we get asked lots. We're not expecting agents to be surveyors, to be conveyancers. Those people are in positions for a reason. What you should do is make people aware that there are covenants, and what we say throughout the guidance and throughout anything we put out about it is that people buying the property should still have their legal professionals on hand to look at this information when it's provided to them. We don't want people to guess at this information because some of it is so important and can have such an effect on the way they would live in a property. So as an agent, you just need to say that there are covenants in place about parking. Here's the covenant, speak to your conveyancer and they will give you more detail about it. So we don't want you to interpret the nitty-gritty detail, but what you do need to make people aware of is that they are there and that they need to consider them more.
Okay, last couple for right now. A couple of questions specifically related to Part C. So for example, what if the vendor does not know the information? An example given there by Mark was if they're an elderly couple. What if someone's saying to you, we don't know that information? What position does that leave us in as an agent?
Yeah, so within the legislation, there is a due diligence defence, but what that says in the legislation is that you need to have done reasonable checks to get information. So things like council tax, if an elderly couple don't know that, but you can quickly search online or quickly do a flood search in a few minutes to see if it is in a high risk area, that's not an excuse that people don't know that information. So some senses it will be easier than others, but it's not just because people don't know it, it doesn't mean you're exempt from giving that information because there are other ways to get it.
Okay, actually, just before I go on, there's a question just come in from Martin, which I'm going to read out in its entirety so it's really clear for you because it relates back to the DMCC again. Is there going to be a difference between what was the CPRs and the business protection from misleading marketing regulations, or are both being absorbed into the DMCC?
The CPRs definitely is. Business protections I'd need to check. I think it's being absorbed, but I don't want to say that outright. I would need to give more information on that. So I would need to check on that before saying definitely. What I can say with the CPRs, the information in it remains pretty much unchanged. There's a few subtle differences, but nothing that would affect how you dealt with it in terms of, dealing with misleading information.
Okay, lovely. The rest of the questions actually tie really nicely to the second part of our session this morning, which I hope you're really going to enjoy. Well, I'm going to hand over to Hannah to basically take you through the solution which Addland is providing about putting policy into practice. Now, the questions that have come in that relate to that, for example, are things like, where do we find answers to parts B and C, for example? Flood risk. Do we have to access the HMRC website and show the risks, for example? Where do we find X, Y, and Z data? So I'm going to hand over to Hannah because that's going to cover a lot of those questions. Keep the questions coming in, and then we'll come back to a second Q&A once we've seen this little walkthrough, and we'll cover off any additional questions you might have. Hannah.
Thanks, Andrew. I'll keep an eye on some of the questions coming in as well about the specific data. I think some of them are really key. It's just about where to find all this information. Suddenly there's another thing that as agents you have to do and recognize and keep on top of. There are a number of data sources that you can go to that are open data sources that you're available to access to from government websites. But we're now talking about a huge amount of time to go to each of these different websites, to have maybe accounts of each of these different ones, to be able to do the different lookups and bring all this data into one place. We are kind of property data experts. I can call myself a data geek quite openly. I kind of love data and we love property data here. So what we've looked to do is how do we take not 100% of the weight off your shoulders, because that, there is still some things that will still be required from the agent side, but how can we take at least kind of 70% of the weight of that off your shoulders and bring all of that data into a central place and give you access to it in one, so that you're able to get the high level information for some of these more painstaking websites to kind of scroll through and look at, and you can get access to it in a much faster and more efficient way for your business, ultimately so that you can get the property on the market faster and you can give a much better experience to your vendors. And just breaking down the, I'm sure you don't want to have conversations about the sewage company and the water company that service thing. There's much more interesting conversations that you can have around, the lifestyle elements and the cosmetic features about a property that are going to be the real selling factors. So that part, we just want to take the legwork away. We work directly with those verified sources, so with HMLR, with the EPC register, with Ofcom, Natural England, Historic England. We bring all of this information directly from source. Our job is to put it all into one central location and to make it easy for you to access. We have the solution as a data solution. It's kind of like 3 ways you can eat it, really, and much of that depends on the type of agency that you are and the technical setup that you have within your system. You can explore this data just from a pure data only environment. We have built APIs where you can access this data and plug it into your own systems. We have a plug and play API, which you can integrate within your own systems, where you can create an instant kind of digital report for all this information. And we have an in-app variation, which is where all of our existing members are able to create instant reports on any property that they're looking to put onto the market or is already onto the market, and display this information in a user-friendly way. And that kind of leads me on to the second part of what's important. We're all kind of talking at different levels of understanding of kind of data geekness and technical understanding about the legalities and everything that's there. But when we're translating this information, all of our job, as I see it, as professionals in this ecosystem, is we have to do a job to translate all this information to make it really easier to the people that it counts for, which is the person selling the home, the family buying the home, the human beings at the end of this. Now, if you went and spoke to most of your buyers and sellers or friends and family that are not within our industry, and you ask them what a UPRN means, or what a restricted covenant means, or what different flood risks means, the chances are most of them are not going to understand this information. They're going to be intimidated by it. They're not going to understand what parts A, B, and C mean. So our job together as an industry is, how do we also translate this into more manageable, understandable, and accessible bite-sized pieces, so that you don't have to spend your time dissecting and processing that data for all of your potential viewers or your audiences. It's laid out in a way that's very easy for them to understand and make their own then assessments about whether that's a risk that they're happy to continue with, or whether that's a risk too far and they want to, as Guy was saying, like make that call early on to say, that property is definitely not going to be one for me, because I know I've already been bitten once about not being able to get insurance because of a flood risk issue, and they'll move on to somewhere else. So we can have a quick look at the walkthrough. I think hopefully Tom has got a nice screen available to share. If not, I can, where I can just give you a quick walkthrough of just taking a property and just looking at how to access this information really, really quickly. We have millions worth of data. We currently process it's such a huge amount of data now. It's kind of the equivalent of about 600 million books of text worth of data that we process on a weekly basis. And we try and service as much data as possible on the 27-ish million properties across the country. In terms of material information coverage, we can cover around 70% of material information parts A, B, and C. Of just over 20 million properties. There are still some of those properties that don't have some of that data available in a digital format, or the data just does not meet the accuracy levels that we need to meet it by in which to showcase it over to you. But there is still a high percentage that can be accessed instantly, and the data can be delivered to you in pretty much less than a second for all of those properties. Tom, if we take a view, yeah, okay, great. This is a proper Winchester location. Hi to any agents who are working in Winchester. Great part of the world to be. So here's a property currently. So this is a quick view for anyone that's not familiar with our platform at all. This is a quick snapshot into our research platform. So we are a map-based data platform which services multiple different data points all into one interactive experience. What you can see right now on Tom's screen is he's actually got the Rightmove layer on. We work with Rightmove to bring all of the current listing data and to showcase that in a interactive map experience so you can have a look at, and then all of the other data interacts with each other. We've got a property selected here, so we can see the boundary of that property that's been selected. And all you need to do is, once you've confirmed, yeah, that's definitely the property. We do work with complete addresses, so you don't have to try and find, like, is it this address? Try and look at street views and work it around. We do work, so this is a 35A Cannon Street. If that's your listing, then congratulations. Once you go to select a report, there's two different options you can go to. We're going to go through the material information pack right now. Click on that and continue. This is actually currently available free for our Pro memberships. I think Andrew's going to talk about how we can give access to that to our members. You make a confirmation and you can then confirm the order, and it will build your pack. So this now takes all of that data, brings it all in one, and takes it to one place. There is a quick dashboard where you can have a look at all of your current material information packs and reports that you've created, and you can see kind of when they were last updated. You can see how many people have looked at them, and you can unpublish them if you want to. Now, if we click on one, we can go and have a look about how the data is now being supplied. So this is bringing all of the data, and as I mentioned earlier, it's putting them into a description that's a bit more user-friendly, so people understand a bit more about what's about the property, what it is about living here, what's it about energy, rather than parts A, B, and C, which just isn't as much fun for a user, for a consumer to understand. So we're bringing this information, we'll lay it out, so we can see now key information about this property, so the type of property, its size, number of rooms, the age. We also add a bit more information that's on that sort of pre-search information, so the total size of the plot, and any relevant information such as the last known sale. Any live information like the current asking price, etc., we refer to the viewer of this to contact the agent. And on the left-hand side, we've got a little sample version that Tom's created now, but it will have the agent's details there. So it will have branding, logo, address, direct contact details for telephone and email, so that anyone viewing this can then directly have a look at and speak to the agent with more of those details. Then as we go down, so it starts to delve into more of the information across material information, including council tax. We're one of the few data sources where we actually look at council tax with the actual banding and the amount of the banding for the entire country. It's just about to go through an update because, as I'm sure you're all aware, the council tax is going up. We don't just give a typical example of Band D unless there's no banding available, so we'll show it all there. Any other relative information that comes from the EPC, so the EPC does provide indicative values for kind of costs, but we give a guidance on that. So at the top, you can see kind of need some help with the little tooltips there. This is just giving a little bit more guidance about how costs are published, how they're calculated, what they're made up by, and what some of the other sections might be. And this is just to help those people that aren't so familiar with, maybe they've never seen an EPC certificate before, maybe they've never seen some of this data. Thank you, Tom. As you scroll down, there's information here from Ofcom, which looks at the availability of the different levels of internet, your mobile coverage from the main providers, details on the specific energy performance certificate. We work with the the official register of the EPCs, and we publish this information. So we will always show the last known EPC certificate that's there, and we will show the lodgement date. EPCs have to be within 10 years to be valid. If it's not, we will display that this is not. So this is assuming that there's a property that hasn't been sold or hasn't had an EPC in the last 10 years, and therefore you're waiting for a new one to be updated. We will then display the information that's there and go through and add, more utilities such as the water company, the stuff that you really do not want to put on a listing because it's just not fun and sexy. Information about insulation and the building, if the property's had an extension, etc. If there's information that we can't cover, you'll see a couple of those that says like safety, check with agent. Now, this is just where there is not an accurate enough source of the data digitally for us to give a confident answer. And therefore, we refer back to the agent so that you can have that dialogue directly with the potential buyer and delve into what those questions are to make sure that they're very well covered and the potential buyer feels more assured with what that answer is. as you scroll down a little bit further. So we've got information relative to the risk level. So if there is a risk point, such as flooding data that's over 50 meters, we can be quite confident to say this is over 50 meters. Our calculations are done at the boundary point of a property. So rather than just taking kind of a center point and just saying, okay, there's a flood zone over here, we can say the distance. We actually look at the full boundary of the entire property. And that's really important, especially when it comes to mortgageability, to insurance, because they're not just going to look at the footprint of the exact property. They will take into consideration the entire plot and whether you have any risks associated that with erosion, flooding, and other things such as, you know, your distance to protected areas, etc. Where there is a risk that is under 50 meters, we will give you more information about that. So you can see with a listed building distance. Now, if the property has a listed building within its legal boundary, we will state what it is, but we'll also tell you where the nearest listed building is. Now, this one can be quite important as material information for a user, especially if there's kind of a wall that's listed maybe at the back of their garden. That can have long-term implications, so that's things that they should know about up front. Restricted covenants, I think that's a question that's come up. It's always quite a hot topic. If we have an absolute answer, we can give the details here that there is an absolute restricted covenant on this property. However, restricted covenants, as I'm sure we're all kind of dealing with the same stuff on this call, as you all, I'm sure, know, some of them have been dated back from, I don't know, the times when a sheep could go and eat its breakfast at the front of your door or something. Like, there's some of them are so old, and they also can take up, like, it could be a restricted covenant that's related maybe to the land in front of numbers 1, 2, and 3, for example. And that's where there is some air of, is it a restricted covenant? Is it not? Wherever there is any sense of doubt, so whenever there's not 100%, we give the opportunity for the reader to check with the title register, which means that there is a responsibility then for the buyer to check it. And I'll come on to how they can do that in a minute. There's some information there that is not necessarily in material information. We're just sort of trying to future-proof a little bit about other things that may come up and other things that may come up in that pre-search environment. So we're taking it a step further and answering some questions that maybe you don't have to worry about as well in the future. I think we discussed a little bit about public rights of way. If there's one at the back, we will give you that detail as well. So if there's a footpath, we'll tell you, you know, there's a footpath that's there. Then it goes on to kind of more of your planning checks. So the property we've just looked at here is actually in a conservation area. So we'll tell you which conservation area that is. That has, you know, implications of what you might want to do with that property. And if there is a permitted development restriction. So if one of those categories of restrictions has been met, such as the conservation area, the listed building, the type of tenure, then we'll give a bit more information about that. Again, we always give a bit more to the user to say, okay, here's what we know, but if you want a bit more, here's where you can go and find the answer. Some of it is to take the pressure off the agent, and some of it is just to give a bit more reassurance to the end user. In terms of planning history, so we're bringing that local planning history. We'll tell you if there's anything that's live on that property at the moment, and also any previous applications going back for the last 3 years. So as a new buyer, you can see, oh, okay, I can see that they had an extension, whether it's improved or not. We also look at nearby planning applications, so within 500 meters of the property, so you can see anything that's live and anything that has been that has been decided in the last 5 years. So it gives you a snapshot of some of those. If you want to really delve into more planning activity, we do offer links where you can come into our platform where we have planning application details going back for kind of 50 years in some local authorities. So it's just, again, giving the opportunity for the user to find out a bit more. As we go down to the bottom part of the section, this is sort of more of the legal information. So it's the, you know, around the type of title that it is. So it's a full absolute freehold that we're looking at here. The number of kind of polygons, the areas associated to it, title number, UPRN, and importantly, we give the option for any of those readers or indeed the agent to buy the official title document directly. We have a business partnership with HMLR where we can get the official digital copy of the title register or the title plan or both that you can purchase directly from here. So any of those questions, if there is still that little element of unsure or they want to just dig in a bit closer to some of those details, buying the official title documents is where we always direct the source of traffic. I think it's unfair to ask the agents to have to provide that for every listing. It can become very, very expensive. So there's something in there in the middle that you can find with your potential buyers. And that is all of the data. That's currently how it is at the moment. This is currently available, and the team are working with a group of pilot customers at the moment where we are looking at incorporating a kind of editable version of this where the agent or the vendor can add some of that missing information. So things like parking, accessibility, security risks, or building work. So things that can only really be answered by the owner of that property or the seller of that property. We're giving you the access to have more of a manual edit to add it in there, but it will be clearly defined. This is information that has been added by the seller. So again, it's just giving more reassurances to the person reading that pack, but also covering yourself as to, I think Guy mentioned it, it's just having a documented route of, I did the best I can for my due diligence to pass this information on to a potential buyer or renter. And there we go.
Brilliant, thanks, Hannah. Now that has generated a series more questions, but also during that little walkthrough, there were a number of questions which I didn't answer in the chat because you were actually going through them. I knew some of those answers were coming up in the walkthrough. I'm going to cover them off and then we'll pause for a couple of specific questions as well. So some questions came in. Campbell, there was another question about, having to ask owners the information. Often owners don't know the information, things like broadband, they just don't know, etc. Hopefully you would have seen with what Hannah's walked through there that the whole purpose of the solution that we have built is basically to bring all of that information together. So actually what you've just got to do is basically get the homeowner to do as little work as possible. And this is part of speeding up that process of getting the properties to market faster. Most of the work is done for you here. As Hannah said, in a couple of weeks we'll be releasing an iteration to this. There are a couple of other questions about this that had come in about from Amanda, for example, about the ability to amend the information. Yeah. So yes, that will be coming through very, very shortly. You'll be able to send a direct link out to a particular vendor and you'll be able to get them to add in any of the missing information.
Or you can edit it yourself if you're fully aware of that information. Yeah.
Indeed. A different question, but similar theme from Peter Hughes, which was actually about something that obviously a lot of agents deal with, which is probate sales. Mm-hmm. Again, this was an audience where people, the executors of the estate, not necessarily so familiar with that property and not able to answer the questions. Again, the resource that we're providing here is actually, taking away some of that stress and strain for agents in terms of aggregating all of the base data for you. So again, you have done as much as you physically can to find out all the details about that property. So again, a lot of those things I think Peter and Amanda should be done in advance. Amanda also asked a question, Hannah, about the frequency of updates. So perhaps we could explain the difference between some of the contributors to the pack, for example, like the EPC register and the updates, etc., and how that has an impact on the data in the pack.
Yeah, sure. So currently you can produce one today and it's giving you the information on all the latest available. Different data sets have a different frequency of update. We update the entire database every month and that comes through with any new amendments to the land registry database. So new title numbers, changes to that. So we update the entire database every month. But there are some data sets that update more frequently than that. Planning applications and on-market data does update on a weekly basis to get that more regularly. And we're just doing investigations at the moment around the National EPC Register and looking at working with them and how we can get more frequent updates, because currently there's a full data set that's published monthly. We're working with them at the moment to see how we can access that on a more regular basis so that there is less lag time. So even if there is a EPC that's there from maybe 9 years ago, but there's a new one that's being added because the property has made some improvements to its scoring, etc., about how we can get that updated. So we'll keep anybody up to date with any changes there, but weekly and monthly is where it is at the moment.
Okay, lovely. Guy, I might just bring you back for two other questions, if I may.
Yeah, of course.
One of which is from Sally, which is what information needs to be provided in, say, an advert copy versus a window card versus a brochure versus a listing, for example. What's your response to that?
Yeah, of course. So you need to consider what the most important information is when doing a smaller advert like that. Our interpretation is that Part A should be on there as a minimum. So looking at the price, any other unavoidable costs associated in the tenure of the property. Obviously, you're not going to do an A4 sheet covered in all the information about the utilities, but what you think is the most important. So if you put Part A and it flooded last year, then that's probably going to be quite important. So that should be considered as well. So whatever you class as the most important information.
Okay, thank you. One of the really lovely aspects of what Hannah just walked us through as a solution is that this can be provided, the access to this can be provided as a one-click solution. So rather, for example, on your listings in your nice marketing collateral that's forming that nice emotional bond with the potential vendor, for example, you don't have to put all of this information. We can provide a link to it, which you can put on your particulars, which then directly links through the particular potential buyer, for example, through to that interactive hosted web page that Hannah took us through. And Guy, from a trading standards perspective, that is giving people access to that information, and you're quite comfortable with that as a route to market. So I think that just helps answer Sally's question slightly differently from like a listings perspective. You don't have to clutter your listings with all the information as long as you provided easy access to this information, correct?
Yeah, so again, in our guidance, our view was that Part A should really be on the listing, and it usually is, things like price and tenure information. But the rest can be one click away. So if that's via a link to this information, then we see that in our guidance, and our interpretation is that that's acceptable.
Brilliant. I think maybe just a final one for you for the moment, Guy, from Gerard. A lot of covenants are buried in historic transfers, conveyances, etc. Land reg often just refer to covenants, as in a transfer from 1977. Likewise, to say, flood data is not sometimes available. So there's a view here from Gerard that relying on that is questionable. I think you made a point earlier about just exposing that something existed as opposed to necessarily needing to put all the detail down. It feels like maybe that comment you made would apply to this particular question as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It's making people aware that there is something there. Again, if there's really niche covenants, like you were saying about sheep grazing on your lawn on a Sundays and things, things like that, we wouldn't necessarily consider as material information. It's also noting that, yes, make people aware. We know this isn't going to cover absolutely everything. There still needs to be the diligence done by the conveyancers and the surveyors through the process. It's to get the information out there that is available, and that's what we want to show. What I would say off the back of that is something else I saw someone said in the questions, is that if you get further down the line and information that wasn't available beforehand comes out and the property falls through because of that, like the property needs a new wire and no one will lend a mortgage on it without it, that is very likely to be material information. And a lot of the complaints we get are from people that have gone to purchase a property. It's fallen through for them for a reason they weren't aware about. And then they see the property relisted without the information on. That's where one of the biggest things of complaints are. So if it falls through for a reason that is going to affect most people, then you really have to make sure that you're putting that on the listings to cover yourself. Because often people are frustrated it fell through for them, and will be looking to see if the property comes back on the market. So something to bear in mind.
Thank you. Now, a lot of the remaining questions, of which there still are quite a few, we are aiming to close at 11 o'clock. So for those of you who are on a time limit, don't panic. I will try and wrap up by 11. But there are a few important points probably just worth hanging on for the next couple of minutes. So a couple of questions. Rachel has asked, do the planning checks extend beyond the street the property is on? Now, there's a few questions like this that actually relate not necessarily just back to the material information, but to other information which you can find on the Addland platform. So the planning checks cover both the property itself, but we also cover in our material information pack neighbouring or nearby planning applications, the nearest planning applications which are either approved or in flight around that property. So that's one of those areas that Hannah referred to, which is over and above what needs to be in there from a compliance perspective, but that pack does include the additional information on that. A few of the other questions that are product specific, for example, there was a question which I do think is worth just broadcasting the answer to the audience, which was a question that had come in question from Campbell again about Rightmove, or what if I'm an agent not on Rightmove. That particular frame we just showed shows one of the key benefits additional to MI on the platform again, which is our live on market comparables layer. The information on the material information pack is available on any of the 27 to 29 million houses in the UK, depending on how you measure that number, as Hannah always reminds me. It isn't dependent on the listing, it isn't depending on being live on market, it is any of those registered titles. The information that gets pulled into the pack will depend on the information that's available from the various sources that we go to combine it. So for example, if the EPC registry is not done, obviously there will be less information on that particular title, but with over 20 million properties having still a live EPC from within the last 10 years, you have a high chance of having the more of that pack filled.
Yeah, you don't have to be on any portals. It's completely independent. We just bring all the data into one place. So it doesn't matter where your own subscriptions lie.
No. A couple of other questions that have come in, one of which relates to the commercials. Now, this pack is designed, like everything we do at Addland, to be high quality data, low cost access. So this is only going to cost £5 per material information pack, which is amazing in terms of the amount of money that it can save you in terms of the time aggregating all that data. But even better news than that, and one of the things that we've been working on, is this particular little message here, which I no doubt everyone will be delighted to see. We are giving all of our customers access to material information packs for free for the remainder of 2025, which is over half a year. So that is a massive benefit that is coming out for our existing customers. A number of our existing customers have been waiting with anticipation for this, and I can see a few of them during the call have just gone on and tried it for themselves. With an Addland Pro membership, now an Addland Pro membership is our professional access to the platform. That gets you access to absolutely everything on the Addland platform. So that's all of your ownership information, the valuation information, property ownership information, for example. That's historic comparable data from Land Registry. It's live on-market data provided by Rightmove, for example, which we have a commercial agreement with. So it's 100% of that data for complete coverage of the market. There's been a few questions asked also about Land Registry data. We do have a live link to integration with Land Registry. That means we can provide access, as Hannah said earlier, to the title register or the title plan. That's a straight through cost. Again, we just have a single monthly membership cost for Addland Pro, which is just £119 a month. And unlike a lot of other providers, it is unlimited access to the platform, to title numbers, to reports, etc. And if you're with us on that program, you get free access to your material information packs for the remainder of the year. We believe it is a really important area for agents over the coming few months. It's part of our commitment to support the industry and make sure everyone is as well prepared as they can be. And we would like to continue in doing what we do, which is basically, as I said right at the beginning, helping agents get properties to market faster and making sure that they are compliant. There are a couple of other additional questions. It is a very good session today. I must say I'm very impressed with everybody on the call. Thank you very much. It's much more enjoyable when there are a whole series of questions coming through. Let me see if I can scan the last couple just before we round out for today.
Just one there, Andrew. Sorry to jump in. There's one there about adding the links to CRMs, and that's an important point many of our customers have asked, is how can we add the links to CRMs? I think it's worth just jumping in on that one, in that most CRMs now have a field. You can add brochure links, you could add video links, you could add virtual tour links. Some of our customers are already using those fields for adding the material information pack links. So it's entirely possible. Obviously, the fields that the CRMs have provided are nowhere near the number of data fields you need for the packs that they have in them. So yeah, those fields are a good place to host them. And we are working with many of the CRMs as well to see how we can integrate these packs directly into CRMs.
Thanks, Tom. That's very handy. There are far too many to scroll through at the moment. I would say that if there are any other specific questions, feel free to reach out to us after the session. We're here to help, take any questions, be help if we can. And if you'd like any more details on, again, the other facets of Addland in addition to the material information pack, we can certainly talk to you about that. We will follow up with everyone with a quick email afterwards to send you a recording. A number of people have asked, is that recording available? And because we would like to share it internally. So we will, of course, follow up with all of you. thank you very much for joining. An hour out of your day, we know, is a lot of time, but this is a very, very important subject for us to get right. I would also like to thank Guy very much for joining us as well and giving us a really, really strong overview of the impact of the changing guidance on the industry. But more importantly, I think the chance that is sort of coming through in the sentiment I'm hearing as well, which is this is actually going to be a benefit to us. This will drive faster property sales. It will make us all bring that information to the front, make people make more informed decisions. So I think in essence, today is about how can we see this as a benefit for all of us and how we can get going more smoothly and faster. So thank you very much again. Thank you for participating on the chat and your questions. And as I say, if we haven't managed to quite get to your question within the hour, then just drop us an email back after we've emailed you out, and we will certainly get back to you. Thank you, Hannah, as well, and thank you, Tom.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you.